day of the Afkar-e-Taza Thinkfest 2026. Our session today is titled Trump's Zionist Peace. This session brings together Ms. Leila Hatoum, a veteran investigative journalist and political economist with over 2 decades of experience reporting from the Middle East conflict zones. Currently, she's an advisor to the Prime Minister of Lebanon for International Media Affairs and founder of MENA Uncensored. She is a frequent commentator on CNN and Al Jazeera, offering frontline insights into regional geopolitics. She will be in conversation with Mr. Ejaz Haider, a senior journalist and defense analyst who has held editorial roles at the Friday Times and Daily Times, hosted shows on Dawn News and Sama TV, and is currently senior advisor at SDPI. He is also the editor for National Security Affairs at Capital TV and anchor of his own program. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our guests as they enlighten us with their insight.
Thank you for this CV, which is as old as I am now. I was with SDPI about a century ago, but that's fine. Anyway, it's great to have all of you here. And I'm really grateful to my friend Leila for accepting the invitation, travel all the way from Beirut. When we were deciding this session, Dr. Yaqub Bangish asked me how I wanted to title it. So this title, Trump's Zionist Peace, is a very deliberate title because Trump is pretty naturally a Zionist. And one of the things that I've talked about and also written about is that, among other reasons, the 7th October military attack by Hamas and other resistance groups into occupied kibbutzim in occupied Palestine was because what Trump did in his first tenure. And we'll talk about that. But let's remember that he put a cabal of American Jews as his advisors. His ambassador to the Zionist entity was an Orthodox Jew whose daughter made Aliyah while he was the ambassador. He was also remains very close to right-wing Zionist, religious Zionists like Ben Gvir and Smotrich. He arranged a lot of funding for illegal Zionist settlements in occupied Palestine. Similarly, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who's still very active, as we all know, was the one who essentially arranged for what came to be known as the infamous Abraham Accords. He was the one who ordered the US Embassy to move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He was the one who recognized the illegal occupation of the Zionist entity of the Golan Heights. He was the one who did nothing, not even lift a finger, when the Israelis, the Zionists, began expanding their illegal settlements. He was the one who shut down the PLO office in New York. So the list goes on and on. So this particular plan, which is certainly not about peace, and the reason I qualify it as Zionist is because this is a document that has been put together by Trump, his Jewish Zionist team, and Benjamin Netanyahu, who I actually refer to as Benjamin Satanyahu. So we essentially going to talk about that. That's going to be the peg. But of course, we'll then talk about, with Leila, about how the US, which is essentially the mentor of the Zionist entity, and the Zionist entity in collaboration, and also, unfortunately, in collaboration with certain Arab countries, are planning once again to present the Palestinians from this equation and to also create chaos in the region. So I just wanted to give an opening before we start discussing this with Leila. The format is she'll make an opening statement, then I'll have a conversation with her, and then we'll open it to the floor.
Can you all hear me? Perfect. So first of all, I want to just clarify two things. As much as I love to basically embellish my CV, but I'm the advisor to the former Prime Minister of Lebanon when he was Prime Minister at the time. That was between 2020 and 2021. And I advised him on foreign media affairs, but it suddenly basically grew to economic part and other things as well. I immerse myself into everything when I go into a job. I do commentaries for international media, but not for CNN. I worked with them during the 2006 Israeli aggression on Lebanon. I was their fixer. And that's it. I just needed to do this clarification. Otherwise, people will say that I'm lying on my CV. Having said that, it's very important for people to understand that everything that's happening in this world has nothing to do with religion and everything that to do with religion. Zionism in itself has nothing to do with Judaism, but there are certain people who are without religion. They don't believe in God, they believe in money and power, who wanted to create a place for themselves on earth, and they hijacked a religion and they're doing or committing atrocities in the name of that religion so they can actually milk more empathy from the world at any point and more support. In that sense, for those who don't know, Zionism has no roots in religion, in Judaism. It is a secular political movement that's based on hatred and racism according to the United Nations itself. The United Nations voted on that in 1975. And in that sense, the Zionists went angry because it exposed who they are. They are not the original Jews. They are infidels who actually took over or hijacked Judaism to commit atrocities. Much like when you have people hijack Islam and the name of Islam and commit atrocities and terrorism, but they are not real Muslims, otherwise they wouldn't be harming other people. So, having put that on the side, Zionism has grown tremendously over the past century. It controls governments, and in that sense, it controls decision-making process in lots of capitals around the world. And they needed to take over America because it's the strongest country, and they managed to do so slowly but surely. The ones who stood in their face were either smeared, axed, or even assassinated. And we can go into conspiracy theories if you want to, but everything connects to one another. And now we have an extremely pro-Zionist, if not a Zionist president, more Zionist than Joe Biden himself, who called himself a Zionist. And that person is doing their bidding. They tell him, take as much money as you want and give us whatever we want across the world. They're not going to stop at Palestine. After Palestine, it will be Jordan, because they think that they took over Lebanon and Syria. After that, it's going to be Jordan. From Jordan, there's Egypt, then there's Saudi Arabia. And what tells you that they're not going to expand and control everybody else's resources? Pakistan could be next. Africa, they have expanded in the Horn of Africa. Nobody hears about them. They have a military base over there. And in every step that they take, they use the US, Britain, France, and other Western nations to support their expansion over there. They control what you call the decision-making rooms, hedge funds, bankers, etc. And these people finance the politicians who make the decisions. And again, I'm not generalizing over everybody. There are lots of good bankers and good hedge funds, but the ones who make the decisions behind every government across the world are conspiring together because they are controlled by these Zionists. So once you start reading the bigger picture, you'll understand. Can you please put map number 1? This map shows you the expansion. I'm going to walk a little bit, I'm sorry about that, and then I'm going to end it. So here's the United States, Greenland, Venezuela, Democratic Republic of Congo, where 2 years ago they caught an American trying to do a coup. We have a cat watching us now. And of course, Africa is the biggest place that has all the wars over resources, but nobody reports on it because that's where the real war is happening. And then you have the expansion from here. When America actually expands over here with the Israelis, among others, they've taken over Syria, Iraq, Iran. Afghanistan is already gone. They had it for 20 years, creating chaos. Underneath it is Pakistan, and they are the gateway for China. China is the end game for the Americans over here, much like Iran is the end game for the Americans and the Zionists in the region over here. So I wanted to memorize this map because we're coming soon for it, because Greenland, if you see the purple parts, it takes to Russia. And on the other side, it takes you to the other side of the world, which is closer to China.
I love maps because, no, actually, I mean, unless you have the map or unless you've been on the ground, it's extremely difficult to figure out what's going on. I mean, look at Syria, for instance, Syria. That was the land bridge between Iran and Lebanon. And the western pier of that bridge has been taken out. And that was one of their successes. And it's not just the Zionist entity, but the other countries involved in that also, including Turkey and Saudi Arabia and the rest of it. So we're looking at a world which is obviously very complex. But I want to go back to one point with reference to the liberal / secular, in fact, some would also say left incarnation of Zionism. We know that Theodor Herzl did not even like the rabbis. We also know that many of the Orthodox Jewish rabbis were opposed to this. That whole idea of the house of Joseph and house of David, we don't want to get into that debate, but what we have seen with, for instance, Zeev Jabotinsky, and who's the paterfamilias of the Likudniks, and then the rise of this religious Zionism, which has now become extremely important and which is reflected in the personas of people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. So it seems to me, and also the illegal settlers, not just the settlement, but also the outposts. So it seems to me that now that particular brand of Judaism is coming into tight embrace with Zionism.
You have to understand one thing. Almost all of those who started the Israeli entity were Zionists, and they were all professed atheists. For those who don't know, David Ben Gurion, whose real name is David Gruen, of course they changed their names. Ben means son in Arabic. So they tried to alter their last names to insinuate that they belong to the Middle East, but they are not from the Middle East. So David Gruen, or David Ben Gurion, prided himself that he never stepped foot in a synagogue. He writes it in his memoirs, that he never stepped foot in a synagogue ever in his life. And he was a wanted terrorist by the British. The British mandate called him a terrorist because he was blasting the British troops over there and killing Palestinians along the way. So that terrorist atheist was the first prime minister of the Israeli entity. And he's one of the founding fathers of the Israeli entity. And he's a Zionist. Those people don't believe in religion. And the world did not trust them. Albert Einstein sent a letter to the Israeli prime minister at one point, or actually he wrote an article, a letter to the Israelis in an article that what they're doing is wrong. And Albert Einstein is a Jew. And it shouldn't be in the name of Jews that they're doing what they're doing in Palestine. So at the end of the day, how can you bring all the Jews of the world to come to your viewpoint? Slowly but surely, you start ruining history and creating an alternative version of the story that fits the narrative that Zionism is part of religion, that the Jews have nowhere to go but Palestine because it's the promised land, despite the fact in Judaism, against Zionism, in Judaism, you as a Jew, you should remain in diaspora as good citizens in the states that you are until Messiah comes, which is their Jesus, and he ushers you into the promised land. So how you can change the mindset of the Jews to come over to Israel? You start trying to convince them that Zionism is good. If you can't convince them, you control the media, you control the leadership, you change the narrative, and slowly but surely, everybody who knows the old narrative would die at one point, and what's left is the new narrative that they have put through. So when you're speaking about Ben-Gvir and Smotrich today, they were preceded by Kahana. And before Kahana, it was basically the founding fathers of the Israeli entity. And before them, it was Herzl, who was also an atheist. And he was buried in Palestine, despite the fact that he didn't come from Palestine. And those people have nothing to do with the promised land. They're breaking another commandment by God that he had given to the Jews. So they don't care about religion. So at the end of the day, what they seek is power. And if they cannot get it one way or another, they will create wars or control governments to actually achieve that power.
That's correct. But there are kind of two strands. For instance, if one reads Herzl's badly written novel, if I might say, Alt New Land, The Old New Land, which has incidentally Rashid Bey as the only Palestinian character in that. One of the antagonists in the novel is a rabbi, because Herzl thought that the white Jew, the Ashkenazi, are going to come here, and Rashid Bey, who's really grateful as a Muslim that they're here, and King's Court asks him, aren't you, aren't you disappointed that you are no more sort of the master of this land? He said, no, I mean, these guys are great. They've brought so much prosperity, inclusiveness, and the rest of it. So that's one strand of it. The other is the Jabotinsky strand of the Iron Wall. And as I said, this is the pater familias of the Likudniks. And so you get that strand, even though, as you said about Ben Gurion or Grun, actually, incidentally, Netanyahu is also was named differently.
Milikowski.
Yeah, Milikowski. But I'm happy he calls himself Netanyahu, because it's very difficult to call Milwaukee Netanyahu. It's easier to call Netanyahu Netanyahu. So that's good. So in that sense, he and Chaim Weizmann, they were the ones who were, through Hamed, poisoning the Palestinian wells. Yitzhak Rabin, who has now become famous for having done the Oslo and the rest of it, was one of the military commanders who was tasked to actually expel and exterminate the Palestinians. And this is history that needs to be clearly understood by people outside. I mean, the Palestinians understand this. Lots of Arab intellectuals understand this. But in our part of the world, it's mostly either forgotten or not known. And I think it's crucial for a clear understanding of what's happening, because it's much prior to Gaza. Gaza is a continuation of that policy of slow structured violence and extermination and expulsion of the Palestinians.
There's something that people don't know. So the colonization of Palestine by the Zionists, we're not talking about the Jews, by the Zionists, did not start after World War I and the Balfour Declaration of 1917. They've planned it for the next 100 years, okay? This is what strategists do. They don't basically plan for the next year or two. They alter their plan for the next year or two, but they have a plan set for the next century. When they created the Middle East with its current boundaries between nations that sometimes are not homogeneous, they did it on purpose so that they continue to fight each other. Then they will use it after 100 years and redraw the maps like we're seeing today. Palestine, they started going into Palestine in the 1830s. 1832, the first wave of the Zionist Jews were sent over to Palestine. Under the Ottoman occupation of the land, or the Ottoman Empire, it banned the Jews from entering Jerusalem and Palestine and settling in it. And they had to exert so much pressure to the extent that the Sultan allowed them to go in with a pink slip. For those who don't know what the pink slip is, if you are a Jew who wants to go to the Holy Land to do pilgrimage, what do? You hand over your passport at the borders, and then you take a pink slip instead of it, or a red slip. And then by the time you exit, you give it back and you take back your passport. The first wave of Zionists went there with malintention. They wanted to stay in the land. So they handed over their passports, and they tore the pink slip, and they stayed inside Palestine. And the first of the settlements they created was in northern Palestine, and they were supported and financed by a British nobility, a man called Sir Moses Montefiore. He started before even the Rothschilds started financing the Jews going into Palestine. And what did he do? He continued to finance them until they established Jauna, for example, one of the first settlements in 1852 and 1870s. They started growing these settlements. By 1901, the smear campaign against the Sultan to topple the Sultanate was launched by all these Zionists who tried in the 1800s to take over Palestine, and they couldn't. And they tried to buy Palestine from the Sultan, and he refused. Herzl actually visited the Sultan at one point, and I said, like, we can pay for land over there, and he refused. He said, can we give us a homeland for the Jews? And he said, this is not for you, this is for the people. And he issued a decree banning the Jews from buying land in Palestine. So what did they do? They created a smear campaign, tarnishing the image of the Sultan. They capped on the mistakes of the Sultanate itself when it was killing the Lebanese, the Syrians, the Arabs who were under the Ottoman occupation. They used that against the Ottoman Empire. And by the early 1910s, 1911, when First World War later on started, they had approached the British and other governments saying, we will finance you if you promise us a homeland for us. And that's how the Rothschilds received a letter from the king, from His Majesty's basically government, actually, not the king himself. But they speak in the name of the king. They saying that the king basically promised them the land, and he will give them the land based on that promise. But he had received financing before that. We were just talking about it. So when you receive finance in exchange of a promise, that's actually an agreement. And it's a done deal because they already paid the money. Now you have to hand us the land. So they had planned it beforehand. And what did they do between 1917, when they got the Balfour Declaration, until much later? They started sending waves and waves and waves of Jews from Europe over to Palestine. And what did this end with? It ended with a change in demography and race of the people who are living in the land. For those who don't know, the Israelis are now trying to hide it. The Zionists are trying to hide the original story. They're trying to claim that the Palestinians are Arabs who came from elsewhere and they settled in the land. But the Jews were there before them. The funny part is that Chaim Weizmann, as a historian, he has a book, he had written a book. And also basically David Ben-Gurion, he did that as well, where they said in 1918, it's written by them, that the Palestinians are the fallahin. Palestinians is fallahin, which means the farmers, right? The Palestinians are the natives of the land. They never left. They were occupied by the Arabs, and now they speak Arabic, and they took that religion, but they are the natives. So if the Israelis, the forefathers of the Israelis are telling you that the Palestinians are the natives, and now they're trying to change the narrative, look at the masses across the world, including in Europe, who now believe that the natives were the Jews, and the Palestinians are not the natives. So you can use their words against them, but you have to read. After 100 years, people will have forgotten what Weizmann and David Gruen and others had said, and they will only remember the new narrative, the Zionist narrative. The house of David and the house of Joseph, this is also an alteration of the original narrative. There's nothing called the house of Jacob and the house of Joseph. Yusuf, Prophet Yusuf or Joseph, is the son of Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons. And when you speak about David, among others, they're trying to alter the narrative to fit their own, what you call, lies and propaganda. They use some reality and then add a lot of what you call poison into honey, and then they dish it to you as the actual history, but it's not. I caught them in one of the lies, and this is how they control the world, this is how they start wars. If a place doesn't fall under them, they go and control the finances, control the government. You know what AIPAC does in the US? The decision-making process. They go after the most powerful of politicians, if they cannot bribe them, if you don't need their money, they will try to find a mistake that you've committed and they will embellish on it. And may I basically mention Epstein? Do you know the story of Epstein? Okay. So you understand that when you don't need their money, they catch you in compromising positions. And if it's not compromising positions, they will create that compromising position, take a picture, and then basically try to blame you. The smartest of the people that I've ever heard or met was, one of them was basically the former Egyptian ambassador to Tel Aviv. Listen to this one. They filmed him having an extramarital affair. And they came over to him, they sent him the Mossad, the Shin Bet. They're like, these are your pictures. They wanted to actually recruit him to be a collaborator and a snitch on his own government, and like to leak some information for them. So he took one look at it, and of course, when it comes to being an ambassador in a very critical position, in a very critical place, they do have what you call intelligence and military training. So they can control their emotions, right? So the ambassador, he said it in an interview. He's like, I was looking at those pictures and I said, oh, these are great positions, don't you think? They cannot use it against him anymore. He's like, I did a great job. He's like, I screwed you, you're not the one screwing me, the other way around. And they couldn't use it against him. And then he uses it in his interviews, he speaks about it. This is a former ambassador. So they couldn't catch anything on him, so they couldn't use him. But they use other people who are afraid of their image would be tarnished. And this is how they start controlling you bit by bit. And the first time you actually work with them, you're stuck, because eventually they can tell the world, you worked with us, you cannot go back on this one. We're going to expose you. And this is how Zionism works. Zionism controls you as a politician. If not, they will grow you from nothing into something. Suddenly you hear, for example, about certain people who became politicians. You don't know anything about their background, nothing whatsoever. And if you don't comply, they will find somebody else. There's always somebody who's bound to need money and is willing to sell his people for them, or basically open the world for them, like Trump is doing now, using the name and the position of the presidency. That's usurping power. He's using the US presidency to do what? To fight wars that will not benefit the US. You think that it's going to benefit the US, but lots of American citizens, officers, Delta team have died. For what? For someone else to claim a nation in somebody else's land. And it's not going to stop there, because once they take over Iran as well, it's not going to stop. You think that they're going to stop? They want to control the power positions and the resources. No matter how big the empire gets, it will need more resources. It will reach China eventually. They need to clip its wings, but it also will control Africa. And the fight over Central America and Latin America, the backyard of the US, has already started. Not because the US doesn't want people who hate it behind, like in its backyard, but because there are lots of resources over here that they need to control. And it's not for the benefit of the US, because they need to continue to fund who? The Israeli entity. Hundreds of billions of dollars in weapons, tens of billions of dollars in direct finances and taxes go there. It's not sustainable unless you find new resources, and this is why you find wars all across the world. Two countries, and of course the former mandate powers, conspiring together against the natives of the world. It's really sad.
But as they say, there's many a slip betwixt the cup and the lip. Just a couple of points before we open it to the floor. One, there's a lot of literature written by the Zionists and also pro-Zionist analysts elsewhere about the Zionist concept of their security rings. There was the inner security ring, which included Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. So Egypt and Jordan were taken care of in a different way. Lebanon and Syria, of course, we know what's happened there. And then there's the outer security ring, which involves Iraq, Iran, and Libya. So we know what has happened to Iraq, we know what has happened to Libya. So the only entity left is Iran. So what's happening there in terms of exploiting the internal fault lines and organic grievances, there's a very clear indication of external interference into that. As Leila said, and this is a point that I've also made many times. If you are what we consider as a rational choice actor, the United States' interests in the Middle East or in the greater Middle East do not actually converge with the Zionist entities. Because the Zionist entity wants chaos in the region. It's through chaos that they believe that they will remain secure. And this is not a new strategy. I mean, if you go back to how Cardinal Richelieu, the French first minister, when he had to keep France secure from the Habsburgs and ensure that there's no German unification, he was prepared to reach out to the Protestant Swedish king in order to ensure that there's a balance of power and the Germanic tribes keep fighting among themselves and France will remain secure. It's the same kind of strategy that the Zionist entity is trying to do in the greater Middle East. Secondly, this particular plan, it's completely wishy-washy as far as the essential issue is concerned. The essential issue of the Palestinian self-determination. There's no Palestinian as part of this Board of Peace. There is an authority below this where they're supposed to have these technocrats. But that's about it. It's been, precisely, the council. And it's not, it actually allows the Zionist entity the space to continue to expel and exterminate the Palestinians. And this is, again, something which, fortunately, the revisionist Zionist historians have told us, like Benny Morris, for instance, Abu Shalem, Ella Shohat, and various others. So we know, Ilan Pape. I mean, Ilan Pape and Abu Shalem, of course, are not Zionists. They are Jewish historians, but they've told us very clearly how this entity is a settler colonial project.
But I disagree with you when it comes to Ilan Pape. Avi Shlaim, for example, who comes from Iraq originally, he's a Jew from Iraq. So he's a native to the Middle East, but he's not native to Palestine. Left the Israeli entity and went over to live in the British Kingdom, like the United Kingdom, in the UK. When it comes to Ilan Pape, he continues to go back and forth. He has a house in Palestine. That house is on stolen land. He will tell you that he's not a Zionist, and listen to me, but you also see some of what you call the poison into honey. Sometimes you need somebody who's extra credible in front of everybody. He's attacking the Israelis, but he's passing the narrative that you need to hear, and you will be happy with it, but it's not true. He's a historian, but they distort history as well. I wouldn't trust somebody who would claim that he's not a Zionist and still goes back to the Israeli entity and teaches over there for a reason. Because if you are a real Jew, you will not set foot in the Holy Land, if they consider it a Holy Land, until your Messiah comes back and you are ushered over there. That's why you have thousands and tens of thousands of Jews who refuse to go back to the Israeli entity. Millions, actually, not thousands. If you look at the whole situation, you have more Jews outside the world than the Jews who live in the Israeli entity. If all the Jews in the world, at any point, believe that they have the right to the land now before Messiah comes, you would have seen all 19 million of them in the Israeli entity. But they don't go back because they don't want to basically break the covenant with God and infuse more fear, what's called anger from God over breaking one of his punishments, that they have to live in diaspora until Messiah comes. So at the end of the day, if somebody tells you that they're not a Zionist, don't trust them. I'll give you an example. Who here has heard of Gideon Levy? Okay. For those who don't know, Gideon Levy is actually a very well-known Israeli journalist. And he writes about Palestinian rights, and he exposes the Israeli entity every now and then. He writes for Haaretz, or the land in Hebrew. And it's a very, what you call, leftist paper. And for the longest time, people thought that this person is anti-Israeli to what they're doing to the Palestinians. So he's definitely not a Zionist. And most recently, a year and a half ago, 2 years, he was giving a speech and he said, I am a Zionist, I am a Jew, and I'm an Israeli. So now they don't differentiate between the word Zionist and a Jew, and a Zionist and an Israeli at any point. They're trying to infuse into your mind that Zionist is Judaism, it is being an Israeli, and it's not true. And this is a very educated person, very cultured, and every word that he says is not out of vacuum. Yes, he's doing a great job by writing about the suffering of the Palestinians, but it's the exact right image of a person. If you want to pass a message, they will be using this kind of person. And I grew up basically respecting this guy for exposing the truth about the Israeli entity. But at the same time, I don't respect him, not because he's my enemy, but because he continues and he's willing to live on stolen land, knowing it's a stolen land, and knowing that he doesn't belong there as an Ashkenazi white person, and then try to sell you the narrative that he is pro-Palestinian rights. You cannot have pro-Palestinian rights and steal Palestinian land at the same time. It's like telling the rapist who literally marries his victim, oh, you're not a rapist anymore because you married the victim. It doesn't work that way. So at the end of the day, you have to be very careful when somebody tells you, oh, we're not pro-Israel, or we're against the Israeli practices. If you're still living in the Israeli entity and you're still benefiting from the Israeli entity, that means you are a Zionist and you're willing to allow for this injustice to continue on and on and on. And this is what the Zionists do. They lie and they hide their identity. They show you the nice face. But most recently with this October 7, the best thing about October 7, I mean, like, most of it was bad, but the best thing about it is that the masks are off. And now they're boldly telling you, we don't give a damn. You're going to attack us, you will go to jail. Look what's happening in Germany. Peaceful protesters being beaten. So some of them basically they had the bloody noses, bloody eyes. They were taken to hospital afterwards just because they were raising the Palestinian flag or wearing the keffiyeh, peacefully protesting. In the US, they put not children, but like university students in jail for just basically saying that what's happening in Palestine and in Gaza is unjust. And it's basically what you call, it's a genocide. They put them in jail for that. No freedom of speech anymore. They preach to you about freedom of speech, that you have to do reforms when it comes to human rights. The most human rights infringements happen over there. In favor of who? The West sold its morals in favor of supporting a criminal entity that's controlled by an atheist group that has hijacked Judaism to actually justify its actions. This is the simple truth about Zionism.
Right. Well, about Germany, my old friend Sarmad can tell us a lot about, lives in Germany, has worked with the German parliament, was once my host there, very kind of him. We're going to open this to the floor. Let's just ask questions so that we can accommodate as many as we possibly can and the time that we are left.
May I do one thing? The first question, I want to give it to the young person over here who yesterday was interviewing me as well. I want to hear his first question. Please stand up and introduce yourself. Ask the question and I'll answer you. And then everybody gets to ask whatever they want. I'm here, and if we don't have time, I'll go outside and I'll answer you outside as well.
So till what extent can... So I'm Taha Muzammil. So till what extent can it be said that the Gaza war is over?
That's a really great question. And the war is not over. A battle is over. The war is multiple battles. You lose some, you win some, right? The thing is that it was doomed to fail from the beginning because the Palestinians are not united. If the Palestinians were united from the first place, the PA with the resistance, which is basically Hamas among others, they would have at any point achieved something far larger than regaining Gaza or at least the West Bank. But resisting when part of your people are not supporting you, when the international community is supporting the enemy, that leads to one thing. You're going to fail in this battle, so you need to regroup. Yes, the Israelis and the Americans have taken over. They have plans for Gaza. They have plans for reconstruction, to take over, to kick out the Palestinians. They only keep part of the Palestinians that will be the workforce to build what the Israelis and the elites of the world are going to call the new Riviera of the Middle East. It's not for the Palestinians. Do you think that the Israelis who look down on the Palestinians as riffraffs, and Donald Trump who looks at all these poor people living in tents, he's going to allow them to stay in the Riviera of the Middle East? They invested billions and trillions of dollars in this whole war system to allow the natives to come back? No. What they're going to do is they're going to kick out the Palestinians, keep only a small part that benefit from them financially, and they use their them as workforce, and the rest they will kick them to Sinai. The war is not over, because so long that you have a Palestinian who would wake up one day and say, this is my land, and he's willing to fight for it, whether it's going to be in Gaza or elsewhere, that means the war will continue to rage. So Gaza, to a certain degree, was lost because the whole world conspired with the Israelis against the Palestinians. But at the same time, the war is not over, only this battle. So long that somebody has this resistance in him, the war will continue later on. Yeah?
This is a war with many battles. This is a battle in a very long war. Anyone else with? Yeah, Sarman.
Hello, Leila. How are you? I would like for you to comment on the Trump assassination attempt and how how much control is Trump in the Zionist lobby? How no control they have of him? And was he portrayed after the assassination attempt that he was the right choice as comparative to the Democrats? Because the Biden government were very, very easygoing with the Zionist lobby. They were very submissive to the Zionist lobby, and Trump resists sometimes, a lot of times he resists. He is very informal in formal meetings. He publicly curses Netanyahu, but he has to submit to Netanyahu. We saw that in Iran, and all the stuff that's going on geopolitically. So what's your point of view on that?
We'll take two more questions and then आपसे पहले वो हाँ बोलिए जी go ahead. Yeah, that guy.
My question is essentially pertains to the Pakistani aspect of it as well. So of course it's an established fact at this point in time that Pakistan is going through an identity crisis. Our social identity more often than not has been based on this, or a factor of it has been based on our unyielding support for Palestine, if not the entire Muslim Ummah, and how we're unyielding in that. But our political identity, especially recently, has been based on pragmatism and ensuring Pakistan's survival. Now, how does the state try and consolidate this paradox of sorts, where we are sort of giving up that support for Palestine when we join the Board of Peace very readily and in fact sign the charter as well, giving up billions of dollars in that, right? And will that, as you pointed out, lead to following organic fault lines, which can in the future be weaponized against Pakistan or by any person looking to, or any entity looking to weaponize?
Is this for me or is this for, since this is about, okay, it's for me. Okay, Ji. Sarman, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. As Ejaz said, I had the great honor to invite Ejaz to Germany, and we had a roundtable in the German parliament. And this topic of this session today would have been not possible to be in Germany, because this topic, Trump's Zionist peace, is totally a no-go in Germany. So you see, even the language is very, very sensitive. And what you mentioned, that young Palestinians have been beaten up, is very true. The fact is that what I felt in Germany is that when 1,200 Israelis were killed on October 7th, there was a lot of sympathy, a lot of solidarity. When 100,000 Palestinians, predominantly children and females, were killed, there was hardly any sympathy and any empathy. So I was wondering, how does it come? It was even the opposite. It was criticizing the Palestinians for being dysfunctional, having not an effective authority, hijacking and using civilians as human shields. What kind of narrative is this? When I was living in the US, I was very surprised that every senator and every congressman in his electoral district or in his constituency gets funding from AIPAC, from the Jewish lobby. So this country is not able to be critical towards the US, towards Israel. But countries like Pakistan or Muslim countries are somehow so dependent on Western money, on IMF packages. So how do we deal with this very strange situation?
Thank you both for your great conversation. You had just mentioned that the end game is possibly for the Riviera to keep a labor force that's Palestinian and for the rest to be moved to the Sinai. So in that context, and in the context of the maps of Greater Israel that we have seen, which include northern Saudi Arabia, two of the big Arab countries are Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, of course, has the holy cities and shrines which are dear to all Muslims and to any, any respectful person, really. So what would you say would Egypt survive if the Sinai is inundated with Palestinians? Would it not destabilize Egypt, and what is their thinking? And how is Saudi Arabia reacting to its potential loss of territory if the Greater Israel project succeeds, as you are insinuating that it's already succeeded quite a lot, and the resistance is sort of fading or weakening for the moment. So Saudi and Egypt.
Let's start from the last questions first, okay? Because we have the map over here. And I'm sorry for the circles. This is what I usually do on my phone. When I'm trying to explain things to people, I start drawing circles and arrows, okay? So this is Egypt. It's very clear for everyone, right? The circle over here has Sinai, and then basically you have occupied Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, Saudi Arabia. The Israeli occupation is planning on kicking out the Palestinians from Gaza to Sinai. Why? For those who don't know, the Israeli occupation used to have settlements in Sinai. And they wanted to expand further towards Cairo. They wanted to control the Suez Canal, because once you control the Suez Canal over here, you control a major water navigation causeway, but also most of the maritime trade that goes between, or almost all of the maritime trade that goes between Europe and Asia through Bab el-Mandab, Strait of Bab el-Mandab, also goes through Suez Canal to the Red Sea, Strait of Bab el-Mandab, Gulf of Aden, the Arabian Sea is over here, Strait of Hormuz is over here. You go all the way, India, China, Thailand, and other countries, okay? And vice versa. Everything that comes from here, instead of having to go all the way underneath through the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, all the way to Strait of Gibraltar, to the Mediterranean, or from here to the rest of Europe, this is a long way for them. They can actually take a shortcut. Everybody loves shortcuts, right? And they go through there. So the Israelis want to control Sinai again. They were kicked out of it by the Egyptians during a series of accords, fights, etc. But they promised one thing while they were leaving. They said, we will come back. There's a very famous speech by one of their prime ministers saying, we will be back. And how can they be back without an excuse? They tried to create an excuse or manufacture consent to have war with Egypt when you started having terrorists doing lots of bad things between 2005 and 2011. And that's why the Egyptian government had sent some of this military to Sinai, despite the fact that they had agreed that this place will be a demilitarized zone. They used it as an excuse to fight the terrorists over there, supposedly, right? So the Israelis couldn't tell the Egyptians, don't send your troops over there. But they need an excuse to fight them and get them out. So what will they do? They will move the Palestinians from Gaza over here to Sinai, because they have the joint border of Rafah. So through the Rafah border crossing, they will kick them out. Most of them, slowly but surely. They've already kicked part of the Palestinians out during the past 3 years, 2 years and a half, okay? People were paying $5,000, $8,000 to get out to safety, and they're stuck in Egypt now. Egypt doesn't want them. The Israelis will not allow them to go back. Where are they going to go? And the rest of the ones that are staying in Gaza, nearly 2 million of them, not all of them will stay in Gaza. They will only keep the workforce. They will kick out everybody over here. So what will happen? They will use somebody who will infiltrate between the Palestinians, create a security action against the Israelis, and the Israelis say like, Sinai is dangerous for us now. You have attacked us. It will be another Gaza, but in Sinai. And do you think that the Egyptian army with its tanks will be able to fight? But the fighting with Air Force, they will eliminate the tanks. Yes, Egypt has really strong Air Force, and they do have enough weapons, but when you have the rest of the world ganging up against you, they can easily put sanctions on Egypt. They can curb it and suffocate it like they're doing to Iran at the moment. Iran, without the sanctions, it's a very flourishing country. For those who don't know, the GDP of Iran is anywhere between $350 billion and $450 billion under sanctions. But their GDP to PPP, which is purchasing power parity, is nearly $1.2 trillion. These are not my numbers, these are the numbers of the IMF. And that's basically it's not the ally of Iran, so you can take their word on that number. Maybe it's larger than that, you don't know. So they're curbing it, limited resources, cannot export everything. They need to go through certain channels to get money. They can do the same thing to Egypt until Egypt basically agrees to having these settlements, or war will happen again and they will create problems for Egypt internally. They can use the Muslim Brotherhood like they did with when they brought over Sisi. Before Sisi, there was this big riot and they toppled the regime. The president at that time, Hosni Mubarak, was very smart. He actually refused to have bloodshed. He stepped down. But they created riots. Egypt, which is about 108 million people, at that time it was what, 89, 90 million people. Only 1 million took to the streets, 2 million, let's say 10 million. 10 million out of 90 million, that's a minority, it's not a majority. But they still managed to hype it up in their media that's controlled by the Zionists. And this is a very important tool when you control the media. Today in the US, you have 6 companies controlling 90% of the media in the US. And all 6 companies, guess who they support? Take a wild guess. They don't support me, of course. They support the Israeli entity, and they are headed by Zionists. And they dish you the narrative you want to see. And they can do the same thing to Egypt. They can create a heaven out of Egypt in the media, and they can make it a hell headed by a dictator, etc. It depends on who is in power and how soon they want him out. They did the same thing in Libya. If you go back to the speeches of Muammar Gaddafi, the older ones, he literally told you what's going to happen next. He told you. He foretold everything. And people called him crazy in the media because BBC told you he's crazy. CNN told you he's crazy. Yes, he was arrogant, king of kings of Africa, etc. But the guy actually was calling for unifying an African currency that rivals the world, to denominate oil away from the dollar. So like you sell oil without having to go and buy dollar from the US and use it. And this is why they got him out. So the whole idea is that they can do the same thing for Egypt and they will take over. When it comes to Saudi Arabia, it's something that personally happened to me. Last year I had an interview with Rula Nasser. She's a very famous journalist in Lebanon on YouTube. She's a YouTuber. And she was asking me about Greater Israel. Greater Israel, which extends to all of Lebanon, almost all of Syria minus this small part. I'll show you the small part in a bit because I have it on the map. Jordan, parts of Iraq, parts of Kuwait, half of Saudi Arabia, and all of Sinai and parts of Egypt. Greater Israel will control parts of Saudi Arabia. So she was asking me, what do you think? And at that time, the Saudis were calling our resistance terrorists. So my answer was very natural. I said, I would love to see, because she told me like the Israelis want to create Greater Israel. And I said, Greater Israel includes parts of Saudi Arabia all the way to Mecca. And this is a holy space for us as Muslims, right? So I told her I would love to see, inshallah, the Israelis will take over to Mecca, so we would see, will the Saudis do an act of resistance and defend Mecca or not? Because if they will resist, it means they are terrorists also by their own definition. And if they don't resist, they're cowards, right? So at the end of the day, I said it to relay a message. And the Saudis, of all the things that I said, they focused on that, inshallah, the Israelis will take over. They didn't hear the rest of the part where I said, I hope not, inshallah, no, because this is something that's bad for somebody to wish for on their friends and on their enemies at any point, to have the Israelis take over. Because the Israelis fight without ethics, and they control and occupy without ethics as well. They will commit all atrocities. So the Saudis went crazy, and they created a massive smear campaign against me, trying to say, like, I'm against Saudi Arabia. I have no issues with Saudi Arabia, literally. But let's see if the Israelis will come over here. Will they defend? Yes. It means their act of resistance is terrorist, just like they're calling the Lebanese resistance against the Israeli occupation terrorist at the end of the day. So you know how they can take over Saudi Arabia? Easily. 2 ways. Either they control the ruler, and he will rule by proxy. He will do their bidding. They will have whatever they want in Saudi Arabia without having to fight for Saudi Arabia. Or they can create and hype in the media how dictator Saudi is, and how basically it is lewd, whatever it is. It would have been easier in the past to say that they oppress women. But now they're open. They have discos. Drinking is allowed. You see Jennifer Lopez dancing in her underwear, basically with like the swimsuit on stage, a few kilometers away from Mecca, right? So at the end of the day, how they can topple the people against the regime or create the insinuation that creates a right against the regime, they say they steered away from Islam. The current ruler is bad, he's corrupt, he loves women. They will come up with these things and they will hype it in their media. You'll start hearing it in BBC, New York Times, basically Washington Post, CNN, you name it. Even Qatar's Al Jazeera will actually join in because that's the best thing they can do, actually. It creates sedition, which is really bad. And if they hate Saudi Arabia, they will actually hype it up in their media as well. And slowly but surely, they will have people writing. They try to do it with Iran. The difference between Iran and the rest of the Arab world is that the rest of the Arab world, they are a bunch of countries with egos, whose ego is bigger than the other. I come from Lebanon, which is considered an Arab country. Egos run massive. False prides, okay? And this is what makes you lose wars. False pride, arrogance, etc. You don't want to believe that there's somebody who's stronger than you or thinks better than you. You think that your way is the best way, that nobody can defeat you. So Iran, the Americans, with all the propaganda for 20 years, and I'm not basically praising Iran, this is a fact. 20 years of propaganda, decades of sanctions, dragged it into wars with Iraq for 8 years in the 80s, and then dragged it with another war, depleted its resources during the fight against the Israelis. And they thought that the people were right against the regime, the ruling regime, the leadership. What happened when they were being bombarded by the Israelis? The opposition in Iran stood with the leadership. The opposition to the leadership stood with the leadership. They said, we don't want somebody to bomb our country. They're very nationalistic. They're very proud of their country. And this is what we lack over here in the Arab world. They see the foreigner as somebody who's better than them. We should side with the one with strength. And I'm going to end it with this line for this answer. Usually, it's the ignorant ones who believe the one who has the power is right. And the smart ones are the ones who actually can tell what's right from wrong, and they will stand with the person who has right. Unfortunately, most of the world, the populations, they love the image of a strong leader. It doesn't matter if he's right or not. And that's why Donald Trump, he's the best example to show you. The guy acts with arrogance, breaches all laws. He's not right at all, almost on every, like even when he's breathing, he's not right. The way he drinks is not right. Everything about him is wrong. Okay? And that person acts with such a macho power that you have lots of Arabs, and out of the 2 billion Muslims across the world, most of the patriarchal societies in the Muslim world, they're like, oh my God, he's so strong. He's saying it as it is. No, he's not saying it as it is. He's telling you what he's going to do to you, and you're happy with it. That's masochism, literally. So standing by what's powerful is wrong. You have to stand by what's right. And we lack that in the Arab world, sadly. So Egypt can easily be taken. The Egyptians will be angry when they hear that after you actually air it, but it can easily be taken through media and having people write against their own regime. Saudi Arabia, it can easily be done. They're very nationalistic, but wait until they start creating problems from the inside. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, that answers lots of questions. We're going to conclude the session now. Is that what you want?
Time is out. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to answer the question.
Time's up. We can take the questions outside. So anyway, let me conclude by, I have a more optimistic view of this, because the Prussian soldier and military theoretician Clausewitz has told us, and history reveals to us, that the application of force on an animate object is very different from the application of force on an inanimate object, because the animate object can respond in ways that one hasn't really been able to figure out. So lots of things are going on, and lots of new sort of waves of resistance are emerging. And I think of course, there is the Zionist plan, but for that Zionist plan to actually succeed would require almost no resistance from this part of the world, and I don't believe that's going to happen. So let's give a big hand to Leila, and with that I conclude the session.